My name is Stig Stellberg. My job is to enable leaders in Statoil all over the world in training own teams to get excellent working the compliance and leadership way. I'm going to explain it. I've been working in the oil industry for 37 years. I don't have time to introduce myself. It's in the magazine, because this is a tight schedule. And I warn you, this is going to go fast, because I have a lot of things I want to show you. Statoil is the largest offshore operator in the world. Statoil operates 80% of the fields on the Norwegian continental shelf, and our job is to manage risk. So what I'm going to speak about is how can we manage risk every day in everything we do. Despite 40 years of operations on the Norwegian shelf, we are far away from being fundamentally risk management every day. Far away, unfortunately. The reason why we produce oil and gas is in fact because there is a risk. Because if there is no risk, there is no gain. But because we perceive the possibility for a gain as bigger than the possibility of losses, we are here. So risk management is about adding value, not only taking care of potential losses. It's fundamental about adding value every time we execute an activity. So there is more gain than losses. That's why we produce oil and gas. If you take that one step further as far as how do we manage an operational business as ours, then we have to understand these two dimensions, which is about structure and culture. Where structure is what, in my case, Statoil expresses what they want of behavior. It's expressed wanted behavior. But of course, what is much more interesting finally is what is the actual behavior on the right side, the actual culture. So compliance in this case is about our ability as an organization to deliver according to expectations and requirements in order to sustain control over the business, But if you forget this, you may be in trouble, because it is important to acknowledge that structure has no intrinsic value in itself. What is expressed as wanted behavior has no intrinsic value in itself. It has value first when it is culture. And we know that systems, which is a part of structure, if you don't make them work as intended, they will always, is my experience, start working, being counterproductive. So how do you go from structure to culture? How do you build culture in practice? I'm talking about culture building in practice. What is compliance in practice? Then you have to understand this, which is the only way you can make it happen, the only way. And it is about the right side of the weight, which is more or less all about leadership and interaction. It is only a leader together with his team who can make structure to become culture. Only the leader together with team in interaction, who can make structure to become culture. And as with structure, leadership has no intrinsic value in itself. We don't build platforms in order to execute leadership. Leadership, in this context, has value when it is exercised in such a way that structure becomes culture. This is my most important experience from my 13 years as platform manager in the North Sea. If you ask me, what is your most important learning? And this is it. It is people that do the job. It is people that do the job. And the difference between people and technology is that you can improve technology, and it is permanent as improvement. But you can never improve people's performance and believe it is permanent. Because it is people that do the job, that's why these things are happening. And this is Statoil's record. We have been too many times too close to a major disaster. So many times and so close that we have to be extremely humble. We have been investigating these cases, and we found two things that is interesting, and one is this. We don't make new mistakes. It's just new people who make old mistakes over again. We don't manage to make new mistakes. And the second one, the reason why this happened was not because the people involved, which was a lot of people over a long time, did not have the premises they needed to do the job properly. That was not the problem. They had all the premises they needed. The problem is performance level. In that case, the level of performance. It is people that do the job. This is a picture from the Norwegian Petroleum Associate, where they are when they investigated all serious incidents on the Norwegian shelf, not only Statoil. And what they found is something very interesting. What they say is that there is a significant gap between what the management believes is under control and the facts. A significant, every time they investigate a serious incident. So this is the same weight as mine. It's how the organization is supposed to be and how it actually acts. If that is right, that may be the fact every day, isn't it? That may be the fact every day, the gap. So we have to close the gap. And what is the gap about? Why is the gap? The gap is about what kind of information, according to the authorities, the management relies on to obtain a picture of the company's health. I call it resilience. It's about information that goes from the bottom to the top and is communicated back down. And what they also say is that in early cases, there was clear information. There was clear information that showed that something was wrong. But relevant information was underestimated or not perceived as relevant. And no one challenged the relevance of the information and the range of it. So the relevant information was underestimated in all these cases. This kind of information is, after my opinion, overrated. PowerPoint-driven exercise, where people deliver statistics, green KPIs, to the next level. And they're supposed to be green every time. It is easier to get ahead if you tell your boss or your superior what you think he wants to hear. It's not that easy to get ahead if you tell him what you don't. We are human beings. I can show my boss this graph, and he will clap his hand. And if I show him many graphs like that, he may reward me over time. Because he's saying, Stig, you are a good hand. You are delivering very good. But what I don't tell my boss, showing him this graph, is how I made it happen. I don't show him. I don't tell him. Was it because I cut corners? Was it despite poor leadership? Was it because I violated procedures? I don't tell him. It is not true information. We have to do this also, but it is not necessarily true information. If in one case, this is not true information, and you, as a manager, communicate this over time, you could finally meet the biggest enemy of all in this industry, which is complacency. This is copy-paste from the report. At that rig, there was not a single lost time accident in 7 years. That was the record. It was stated that this was the best performing rig in the Gulf of Mexico. And one of the teams involved stated that everyone in the job was completely satisfied. And at the fatal day, the rig got the safety award based on this statistic. It's about information, about the things that are, I don't think, true. Because they may have trusted the old iceberg, which we have to challenge. I think we have to ask ourselves 2 questions. And it's about, what is it we think that we know? And what is it we think we can? So it's about closing the gap. And how do we close it? And this is, in Statoil, the agenda for closing the gap. And I'm talking about the entire organization. We have to move people from the expressed behavior in the management system over via an action pattern, which is where we explain the management system in an understandable way. But finally, knowledge is not good enough because people finally need skills. And there is one way only to develop skills, and that is training in a true sense. Training. So training is the way we close the gap. And why? Because training in a true sense, if I train my soccer team on Wednesday evenings, which I do, training in that true sense is more or less a matter of observing gaps, identifying, observing gaps. Training in that true sense is more or less a matter of observing and identifying gaps, isn't it? And what do you do with the gaps as a trainer after you have identified it? You close the gaps before they become an event. So training in a true sense, like this, is an extremely effective, proactive action. Proactive action, because you close the gaps before it becomes an event. So what we did, we did it a long time ago, many years ago, but now we have started to be systematic. I'll be back to that. In order to build that culture, with Statoil as one team, we have to have one playing system. One team must have one playing system. If we have 2, it becomes a mess. So we decided to define a generic risk-based pattern of behavior. When that was defined, we started to train people in the job situation. I'm not talking about coursing. I'm talking about training while they're executing tasks together with the leader, who is the trainer now. So the leader becomes trainers from this point in Statoil. So that's what we did. I'll just show you how we defined the generic action or pattern. And this was the way we designed it, because the point is to comply with the management system as a starting point. So we picked up the management system in Statoil, which is, in fact, about how we work and describes how we perform an activity. But it's not that easy to understand it if you go around with this big triangle in your pocket. So we have to operationalize it some way. If people on the street should be able to comply with it. We did it this way. We picked up and emphasized the 3 objectives with the management system, the 3 objectives, which means that every time there is a requirement, every time we perform an activity, there is a requirement for what we shall achieve every time, without exceptions. And that is, point 1, to handle risk. Point 2, to have quality in the plan, in the execution, and to extract learning. And the reason why that is a requirement is that if you don't extract learning, there will be no continuous improvement. And finally, we have to understand that it is while we are executing tasks, culture is built. Culture is not built on conferences. Culture is built while leaders and teams interact on jobs. And the leader is the most important culture builder. So, and what we did, we brought those 3 objectives with us into what we now call the A standard action pattern, which is a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5-step action pattern, focusing systematically on managing risk and learning. Every time we execute an individual task in order to deliver added value. Deliver added value. Not only added value, but demonstrated added value every time, which risk management is all about. So this is the A standard action pattern, which is the structure side. And one important thing is that this is not performing by compliance and requirements alone. It's a lot of more things than just sticking to requirements. But I said, this is the structure side. This is the left side of the weight. And in order to make this happen, or in order to make this becoming culture, you have to add 2 dimensions, which is leadership and interaction. So now the model is complete. In order to build culture every time we execute an individual task. That's why it becomes understandable for people. Because every time we execute a task, we are supposed to be systematic as far as risk management is concerned. But nothing's happened if the leader and interaction is not in place at the same time. So that is the model in total. So what it becomes is a more or less continuous process to make structure to become culture. And also, we think that we become more and more precise doing this every time. I have to jump because of the time. I don't have the time to go through the model, but I want to emphasize step number 1, as far as being risk managed every time, without exceptions. And step 1 is for the group to understand the task. And that is, in fact, the most important, fundamental thing being risk-based. Understand the task, which is about, in a team, common understanding. Because the question is it possible to manage risk for a task which is not understood? Is that possible? And the answer is no. It has to be yes on that question every time, without exceptions. When the task is understood, we have to identify and understand the risk for the task. Because the question is it possible to manage risk which is not identified? Is it possible to manage risk which is not understood? And the answer is no. It has to be yes on that question every time, underlined. And finally, when the risk is identified and described, there must be a risk owner. Because the question is, if there is no owner of the risk, who manages it? if the risk do not have an owner, who manage the risk? Will it be random or will it manage itself? It's that easy. And what the investigators are saying now is that if we in Statoil could have been better in time, just to be good doing these 3 things every time, that list I showed you would have been significantly smaller. I don't have time to go through all the simple steps, just one thing, while we are executing tasks. But that is also one thing the authorities tell us investigating in major incidents. There is a lot of red lights, first yellow and red lights, but we do not manage to stop. So we have to be better stopping, seeing red lights. But what is maybe more important is, while we are executing tasks, to stop as a part of working. When you are risk managed, stopping is a part of working. You cannot work 9 hours with a risky thing without stopping and evaluating what you are doing. You can ask yourself, it takes 2 minutes. It takes 2 minutes. Everything looks fine, but you take 2 minutes anyway. And you ask yourself and your buddy, how do we manage the risk that we defined in the start? That's question 1. And question 2 is, has the picture of risk changed? We have been working for 2 hours, and it has. And you have to compensate. It takes 2 minutes. It is absolutely free. And instead of, if we could just be better in stopping and doing that kind of evaluation and compensate and improve while we are working from the top to the bottom, we will take Statoil to a new step. And it is absolutely free. We call it not only steer, but steer, stop, and check. Steer, stop, and check. Steer, stop, and check. What did I say? Steer, stop, and check. I knew a good first time. Very good. Steer, stop, and check. Okay. But the leadership is the key. And now I'm going to show you how we train the entire organization, in this case, in Norway. Training is the key to closing the gap, because training involves observing gaps. That is the new thing. We have tried everything. This is the new thing, which can be closed before it becomes incidents. We have 2 programs, one onshore and one offshore. This is the one onshore. In Norway, in Statoil, there are 350 managers and teams. So what we are doing, we call this the cascade in 6 levels. We are now systematically training the 350 management teams, and it is the leader who trains the teams, supported by my facilitators, which are professional facilitators. So all the teams trains 3 times, and it takes 3 to 4 hours to do such a training. In addition to the training, there are pre-meetings and evaluation meetings. So 350 times 3 becomes approximately 1,200 trainings. And we have now passed 750 systematic training and pre-meetings and evaluation meetings in Statoil onshore. What is that in practice? This is the way we do it. We use the management meeting, and the leader picks a case from his agenda, which he's going to deliver on anyway. And instead of doing a kind of an ordinary decision-making process, he train and enable his team, which he now is not a part of, to deliver according to the A-standard action pattern, which is a good qualification of decisions. And I used to be the facilitator in top management groups, and I facilitate if I have to, otherwise the leader is doing this himself. But what is this in practice? If you take a look, 1,200 trainings over 1 year, 3 to 4 hours, where the leader stands up and he's training his own team, enabling them to deliver with precision. That is culture building in practice. Because it's the same systematic, it's the same approach, and it's the same requirements. And it's all about complying with the management system. Offshore, we do the same thing. Offshore, we use the most important meeting at all in Statoil for training. And that is what we call the pre-job, the pre-work dialogue. That is the most important meeting at all, because that is the meeting between an operator and a contractor. And that meeting is supposed to be a barrier against incidents. So what we do, we are training these two guys. And it happens, it goes like this. In the job situation, they are now in the shop end. They are in the field. And with them is the first line leaders from the contractor side and from the Statoil side. And the first line leader trains these two guys in order to make sure that they are managing risk in the shop end. And that A standard quality becomes the way they execute. And we do this systematically. I have people on one platform this week. I have 3 trainers on this platform. But it is these two guys who trains them. What do you think they get out of that training? As an alternative sitting in front of a PC in the office. They are getting information which they never had. And which they never thought was a gap. Because they are observing gaps. And they close it, hopefully, before it becomes an event. In order for the first-line leader to be good, the platform manager is responsible for enabling them to train. And the production manager onshore is responsible for enabling the OEM to enable his first frontline leaders. Training. And we are going to go through the entire offshore organization, and it will take 1 more year from today. So, finally, what have I got? If I'm back to my platform, which is a business, as far as closing gaps, and if I'm good as a platform manager, I do understand that my job is to ensure control over that business. And how do I make that happen? If I want to ensure control over the business, I need all individuals on board at any time to have control over their individual activities without exceptions. That is the only way I have control. And then I need a method everyone can understand and apply to individual activities. And it has to be risk-based and proactive. And that is about training. Because that is about observation, and if you think that you can measure behavior, forget it. If you think that you can sit in your office and hire a consultant to measure behavior, forget it. Behavior cannot be measured. It has to be observed. So now I've got the agenda in order to close the gap. Because, as I said, if I manage to close the gaps, I'm fine. We started to train ad hoc in 2009. I'm still not familiar with this, as you can see. In 2009, the amount of serious incidents reported has dropped from 300 a year to 100. That is a significant improvement. We don't know how much we can take into account training. We don't know, of course. But we know that it has happened in the same period of time. So, based on that numbers, the management, top management in Statoil now believes in this way of working. And they are supposed to work the same way themselves. And this ended up in a decision 3 weeks ago, where this compliance and leadership model now is defined as the most important strategic tool for improved safety performance in Statoil. And my project, which was a project until 3 weeks ago, is now a permanent initiative and department in Statoil with a global responsibility. Since we are here with you, Oil and Gas Denmark, Oil and Gas Norway has now adopted the model. This is what it looks like. It is a guideline, valid for the entire Norwegian continental shelf and all the operators and others on the shelf. And that gives us an enormous opportunity as far as together with the contractors to make common costs. Make common costs together with our contractors who execute 80% of our individual activities. And 50% of those activities do not have a work permit. And that is a problem. And that is a gap. Because we know that, in fact, a lot of major accidents happens where people are executing what they believe is routine jobs. It's not a projected job or a work permit or a safe job analysis or nothing. It's just a routine job. Working this way and every time will close that gap because we will be risk-based no matter what we do or if we have a work permit. So, hopefully, working this way, we can stop any kind of incidents as far as the major ones and all the other ones, hopefully. Thank you for listening.